I'm very happy to welcome all of you to today's webinar. This is our first webinar in the ECOP program series, and this is the first webinar in the series that we will be doing together with the International Ocean Institute, which is our partner and our really friends with whom we're doing a lot of interesting capacity development events and training. So really, we are very happy to launch this webinar together today. So today we are going to talk about this year, 2022, and to discuss whether this year has been the ocean super year that everybody was hoping for. And we will listen to the presentations and comments from three our very renowned speakers that we are having today here, and then we will open the floor to discussion and to hear insights from you. So today we are joined by Antonella Vassallo, who is Managing Director of the International Ocean Institute, based in Malta, and Awni Behnam, Honorary President of the International Ocean Institute, and also Angelique Pouponneau, Policy Advisor to the Chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. And we are very happy and we are thankful to you for being here today. So today your moderators will be me. I'm Evgeniia, the Global Coordinator for the ECOP program, the program for early career ocean professionals, and endorsed program within the UN Ocean Decade. And my amazing co-moderator today is Cosmin. Cosmin, hi to you.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Cosmin. I work as a project officer with the International Ocean Institute, and I will be introducing my two colleagues today. The first speaker being Ms. Antonella Vassallo, who is the Managing Director of the International Ocean Institute, member of the IOI Governing Board, and also responsible for the IOI Secretariat, and of course the coordination and expansion of IOI training and educational efforts in ocean governance. The IOI training events are offered through the global network of IOI centers, focal points, and alumni since 1972. A recent IOI capacity development project, launched as a 50th anniversary program, is the Global IOI Ocean Academy that extends IOI capacity development focus to include online ocean literacy programs. Antonella, I give you the floor for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Cosmin. It's good to be here with our old friends again. So it's great to be able to do this together. There's one thing that the IOI does and values very much, which is our point of kind of our meeting point with the ECOPs, which is we train a lot of people, and our IOI alumni are in themselves ECOPs. So we have a very big interest in both of us in capacity development and training you up to be the future ocean leaders you deserve to be. I'm going to share my screen. So I hope you can see it.
Yes,
let me know. Okay.
Good.
So just before I start, one thing that we should make clear, because it will influence the way the presentation comes over, is that the IOI is a not-for-profit, non-governmental organization with status at the UN, at the UN ECOSOC process. So that gives you the viewpoint behind my presentation. So I just remind you, the UN Ocean Conferences, which I shall be talking about, were originally set up to help support the implementation of Agenda 2030, most specifically SDG 14, which, as you're aware, is the SDG dealing with ocean and ocean issues. it focuses on, its targets focus on things like marine pollution, marine and coastal ecosystems, acidification, overfishing, subsidies, conservation, the blue economy, especially for SIDS and least developed countries, and as a means of implementation, increasing the scientific knowledge, providing access to resources and markets, and implementing international law, among others. So this is just the background context under which premise the UN Ocean Conferences are organized. The first Ocean Conference happened in 2019 in New York, and it aimed to find ways to support the implementation of SDG 14. The co-chairs were representative countries, one from the global north, if you wish, and one from the global south, Fiji and Sweden. And the meeting was held in New York in June, round about the day, coincidentally, World Oceans Day, which is on the 8th of June. The intentions were to build partnerships to accelerate the momentum for achieving Agenda 2030, and the conference comprised plenaries, partnership dialogues, high-level discussions, side events, as well as World Ocean Day celebrations. The IOI was lucky that we could, because of we are accredited with the UN, we could field a nice 7-person delegation, which allowed us to participate in the events quite effectively. So I just need you to know at this point that there is a kind of 2-tier participation at these kind of high-level ocean conferences. On the one hand, there are the states representatives. On the other hand, there is the non-state representatives, which are principally civil society and other organizations. So the NGOs and civil society and the non-state participants are able to participate also in certain types of events. We were very fortunate that through the participation of Dr. Behnam, who is with us today, we were able to participate in a high-level dialogue, but we were also able to participate in other side events, one of which is listed here, and also to contribute to achieving SDG 14 through contributing to the roster of voluntary commitments, which was specifically set up for the UN Ocean Conference in 2017. Our voluntary commitments, which we honor to this very day, involve principally capacity development and focusing on the development of capacity of early career ocean practitioners. Now, the second UN Ocean Conference was originally slated for 2021. However, as you know, the pandemic came in the way, and this is not the kind of event that you hold online. So it was postponed to 2022. The intention specifically of this UNOC 2 or UNOC 22, as you'll find it called, which was chaired by Portugal and Kenya, was specifically to scale up action on those pledges already made in UNOC 1 in 2017. There was an element of stock taking, an element of partnership seeking, and solution seeking as well. The focus of the conference were on the SDG 14 targets, including also things like leveraging interlinkages between SDG 14 and the other goals. Okay. It was a massive event held in Portugal. There were more than 6,000 participants, including 24 heads of state, over 2,000 representatives from civil society. Commitments and pledges were made. Plenaries were organized, dialogues were organized, and several outcomes resulted from this UNOC 2. Firstly, a conference declaration titled Our Ocean, Our Future, Our Responsibility. I believe, Cosmin, you can place the link in the chat. And also in the chat, there are other things that other links which might be of interest to you, including one, I think, to the IOI website for more information. Voluntary commitments were raised, high-level commitments from the states and pledges, including an investment of nearly $1 billion to support things like the creation of MPAs and other similar protected areas through pledges made during the event. And of course, the voluntary commitment roster remained open and could be added to. The IOI, again, we were lucky to be able to send a delegation of 4 persons to this. Because of the pandemic, the delegation size had to be smaller. It's something that happens. And we were able again to participate in 2 side events and other things. This happened also because we were able to build on the partnerships which we made during the first UNOC conference. So as you can see from here, our contribution continued to focus on capacity development, including through the addition of another voluntary commitment. But something I would like to point out, which is very specific to this event today, was our partnership with the ECOPs program in submitting a statement to the UN conference. And what this statement focused on was our emphasis on the very unique role that early career ocean professionals like yourselves can contribute, and this unique role that you have to provide greater engagement and implementation of the SDGs. So not only through your participation in the UN Decade for Science for Sustainable Development, but also more generally through your input, through your daily work. And we also pointed out that, opportunities for engagement would be welcomed, would be especially useful in achieving SDG 14. So that's the descriptive part. Now, the commentary. From the outcomes, from the debates during UNOC 2, a number of outcomes pointed out the achievements and maybe the drawbacks or the shortfalls of the conference. Some of the important pointers from the declaration, which was a political declaration, incidentally, I'm going to list in the next 2 slides. One of the important focus points was that of financing. I think it's not news to you that the SDG 14 is probably the least financed SDG in the whole list. So it is the one that currently is attracting the least finance. So one of the proposals or a set of proposals in the outcome document were ways and means of encouraging investment, investor confidence, and attracting the finances that are required. In the document that Cosmin has posted the link to in the chat, there will be the full text of the declaration, and it would be good for you to read it. Other points raised were the issue of the blue economy, what we tend to call familiarly the blue economy, and some pointers on how to accelerate the achievement of a truly sustainable and blue economy. And likewise, there was a focus on policy creation to incentivize the achievement of SDG 14. I know that I'm skipping a lot of text in this presentation, so I'm sure that the PDF version of this presentation can be made available to you eventually for those who request it. Now, some comments from civil society, because I think this is the crux of our presentation. And while UNOC 2 did provide a wonderful opportunity for stakeholders to meet and network, because at the end of the day, this two-tier event with the states on one tier and the NGOs or civil society on another tier is a very formal arrangement. There's a blue zone where only accredited delegations can attend, and a green zone which is open more generally to the public. There are, in Lisbon, there were, for instance, 42 locations where side events were held, as well as the blue zone where the main plenaries were held in the main arena, the Altice Arena. So as you can imagine, there was a lot going on, and you would realistically have the case that you have 4 or 5 very good things happening at the same time. So you need to decide there and then where you're going. Having said that, it was very good networking, a very good way to reach other stakeholders with similar or the same interests. So when an event like this is difficult to access, part of the reason was some bureaucracy, which, well, with the security and requirements that there were at the time, it's understandable that a certain registration process is required. However, something that we've discussed even with other alumni or ECOPs who are unable to attend, is that sometimes the issues around registration and travel and obtaining visas are, for some people, barriers. So I can't say that this was as open or as inclusive as it could have been. To add insult to injury, there was the pandemic still going on. So that, of course, impacted attendance. The fact that there was so much going on meant that there was a lot of dispersion of energy and attention. And I can tell you that some of the events were very far flung. So you needed like a 20-minute walk to get from one place to another. So that impacts on the effectiveness maybe of this event. Something that was noticeably absent, in spite of it having been promised, was the presence of youth at the large plenaries. The plenaries happen as follows. You have the states delegations in the floor, in the main arena, and around them, as observers, civil society. So there is no way that civil society can actually contribute to these events, as they are there only as observers. They're not there as full participants. So this channel of communication was blocked off a little bit to young people and also to civil society. It was difficult to get these voices in there. However, the side events were more those places where they could intervene. At the time, the ISA was still deliberating whether to open on deep seabed mining, and these concerns were loudly voiced at the conference, including on the peripheries, with protests and people holding up placards outside the event. The same concern was shown for things like the BBNJ deliberations. This event was in June, and we know since then that both the deep seabed mining deliberations and the IGC-5, where they were discussing the international legally binding agreement for BBNJ, both of these did not yield the desired results. So there is a bit of a disconnect between what people are saying at UNOC to what people and civil society and even some states were saying at UNOC to, and what in effect happened afterwards, outside and after the UNOC 2. A lot of pledges were made. There is always the question after the event, Will these pledges translate to meaningful action? Will the label of most underfinanced SDG still apply to SDG 14 in a year's time? Okay. One of the things that was super clear and that many people were saying formally in presentations and informally in chats on the side is that we have waited far too long to act for the ocean. Really, the progress is much slower than people hoped for and that people would like. The next UNOC conference is scheduled for 2025 in Paris, and it will be co-hosted by France and Costa Rica. In view of what happened to the deliberations and the concerns at the UN Ocean Conference in New York and in Lisbon, we ask ourselves, will we have learned our lesson? Will it be too late? Will we have learned something from all this? And I would like to leave you here with what I think is a very good quote, which I have found online from an attendee from Singapore, Vivian Balakrishnan. And she makes a very valid point. The oceans were here before us. They will be here after us, even after we have destroyed the viability of our quality of life on Earth. And these conferences are probably an opportunity which we really should not waste, a chance to grasp with both hands, because really the clock is against us. So I know there will be a very interesting poll later. So in view of all I have told you about these two conferences and the ways in which civil society, most of you here represent civil society, I'm sure. Do we have the time? Did we take full advantage of the opportunities we had during UNOC? So I will leave you with this thought. And in the meantime, I thank you very much for your attention. That little QR code leads you to our website in case you want to know more and in case you want to contact us afterwards. So thank you very much. I think I've stuck to my allotted time.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for your insightful presentation. And as you highlighted, the process of gaining accreditation to an UN event is quite the onerous one. We thank you for pulling a bit the curtain on what it entails to participate in such an event. Also, I'm sure that many of the attendees want to make their voices heard on behalf of the ocean at similar events. And hopefully they will be sharing comments and questions in the chat, which I will then relay back to you.
Thank you.
Now I have the honor to introduce a second speaker from the IOI, Dr. Awni Behnam, who is the honorary president of the Institute and who began his public schooling in the United Kingdom between 1953 and 1959, after serving as commanding officer in the Navy of Iraq. He joined the University of Wales in UK in 1972, where he completed his higher education, an MSc and a PhD, followed by joining the United Nations at UNCTAD in Geneva in 1977 as Economic Affairs Officer, before assuming the responsibility as Chief of Liaison to the Group of 77. He was involved in the elaboration of several UNCTAD conventions in the maritime disciplines and assumed the post of Senior Advisor to the Secretary General of UNCTAD. In 2008, he was appointed by the UN Secretary General as UN Commissioner General in Shanghai in capacity of UN Assistant Secretary General. He is currently Honorary President of the IOI and Affiliate Professor with the University of Malta. Dr. Behnam has received several international and national awards and honorary professor posts and has published widely. He is the author of the Blue Economy Concept, and we invite him to give us a short 20-minute presentation now.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. When I first saw this title, 2022 Truly Ocean Super Year, I said, whoever wrote it is living on another planet. Unfortunately, where we are, as we see ourselves in 2022, has its roots way back into the rulemaking within the UN system and internationally, and with the processes that follow. After all, it's rules and regulations and international conventions that are the governance of the ocean because they govern human behavior. What brings me back in my thinking is back to 1967, when Ambassador Arvid Pardo of Malta made that historic declaration in the UN General Assembly that was to lead for UNCLOS. When he made that, he was challenged by an honorable congressman with the following sentiments. Why did the Maltese ambassador make this premature proposal? Who put the Maltese government up to this proposal? It is my conviction there is no rush to elaborate UNCLOS. It is my conviction that the presently agreed international law is reasonable and substantive. There is little reason to set up additional unknowns, additional legal barriers, which impair and deter investment and exploration in the deep, so the sea, before capability and resources are developed, so-called. Paradoxically, this sentiment, the similar sentiments of resistance to accepting scientific evidence 50 years later could also be heard in the corridors of ocean rulemaking institution when it pertained to achieving sustainable development goal as SDG 14, which, as you all know, in terms of the deadline and some of that, we've already passed the timing for some goals. Or the elaboration of a legally binding instrument for areas beyond national jurisdiction under UNCLOS, or when addressing the greatest challenges that the international community and our planet faces in the nexus of climate change, health of the ocean, as it impacts on the biodiversity, it impacts on sea level rise, and it impacts on the sustainable fisheries. Now, the rulemaking is very much part of the situation that we find ourselves in today globally. The Prime Minister of Barbados was president of UNCTAD recently. He said multilateral institutions and values are under threat. The global order is not working. It is not delivering in areas of critical importance necessary to achieve the goals of sustainable development for the majority of world population. This was already echoed by Secretary General Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon also. Antonio Guterres, our Secretary General, in his opening statement, said the world is on the edge of an abyss and moving in the wrong direction. He painted a stark picture of unsustainable inequalities, runaway climate change, and feckless leadership that would must wake up. He felt that the world is slipping towards two different sets of economic, trade, financial, technology rules, new divergent approaches to development, and ultimately the risk of a renewed Cold War. To restore trust and inspire hope, we need cooperation, we need dialogue, we need understanding. We are on the edge of an abyss. And to his evidence to what he has articulated, I see in two areas. Let me begin with the area of fishery subsidies. The world sort of celebrated in June this year an agreement on fishery subsidies, because subsidies are what is killing and destroying the food that the particularly developing countries need, and the sustenance and sustainability of fisheries. So after long multilateral negotiations, there was the WTO agreement. That was a step in the right direction, because we wanted this agreement for a long time to save global fisheries. But it fell far short of the greater expectation. While it focuses on reducing fisheries subsidies that contribute to overfishing, particularly it addressed illegal, unreported, unregulated fish. If you have illegal, unreported fisheries, why are you subsidizing them in the first place? So you're saying that you're stopping subsidies to what has been already stopped in reality. So what were the gains of that long negotiations? There were large gaps in the agreement. It does not include single reference to capacity enhancing or harmful subsidies, which are the main contributors for overexploitation of fishing resources. Does not ban any public money from governments going towards subsidizing capital costs, such as modernizing fishing fleets and replacing engines or running cost of fuels. That despite having this agreement to first steps to partial ban, there were too many cave-outs for developed nations, as some means remain whereby subsidies may be continued. Again, the developing countries did not gain what they hoped for in that agreement. And this, as by nature of it, we have reached an agreement, let's close it. As if we have closed the issues. No, that is the problem. And when the conference in Lisbon was held, no one challenged this agreement on fishery subsidies, and that's also a failure of the Lisbon conference, in my view. Now, the other greater challenge also to our humanity is that the nexus of the ocean and climate change. And that's particularly relevant to sea level rise. all the indications, all the science shows us that it's happening. And if we are not capable of addressing this seriously and trying to find the adaptation means and the resolution of this existential threat, we would be outdone. And this, we've just had the ICP discussing without any results, without really commitment. So it's again being rolled under the carpet. I even asked the question as, do we have vulnerability index to show where are the most affected by this existential threat? And the answer was, it's too complicated. And unfortunately, this is a challenge that still be there, and it shouldn't be in this year that we're still not being able to address sea level rise and the consequences of sea level rise. And of course, finally, the BBNJ, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, that conference. Believe me, the roots of this issue started before 1997, when Elizabeth Borghese said that the ocean and is no longer on the agenda of the UN, and forced the establishment of Unicopolis. And and then the Unicopolis addressed this issue, and finally in 2004 they established a working group to look into the areas beyond national jurisdiction, or biodiversity before national jurisdiction, and that's a play on the political term. Anyway, this year, after something like, correct me, Cosmin, it's been since how many years? 15 years?
On BBNJ, Awni, or?
BBNJ.
It's been a negotiation process of more than 2 decades now.
2 decades. And the biggest part of the ocean, 2/3 of the ocean, is under no governance. And we're trying, and that. And this is what the system of negotiations, the modality of negotiations in the system is outdated. And that's an evidence of this, that it takes us such a long time to come to what is an existential threat to the biodiversity of the ocean. So again, we are, we're told that progress is being made. And that is one that I have come to hate to understand, that we hide our failures in such thing as, but we are making progress. We need results. We need commitment. We need fairness. And the Secretary General obviously put his finger on the issue already, but it is hope that people would take to the issues of the ocean and perhaps make the future years super years for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Awni, for that sobering injection of realism, which only comes with decades of working within the multilateral governance system. Thank you very much. And,
Guilty as.
I will yield the floor to Evgeniia back.
Thank you so much, Cosmin, and thank you so much, Awni. So now we'll proceed to our third speaker, and after her presentation, we will have time for your questions, your comments, and we'll open the discussion, and we'll have a few polls to understand your opinion and attitude towards that. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat or in the questions and answers section. Also, our members are replying to your questions, so don't forget to check the replies to your questions as well. So our third speaker is Angelique Pouponneau, Policy Advisor to the Chair of the Alliance of Small Islands States. Angelique is a lawyer and she holds an LLM in environmental law, specializing in the law of the sea and natural resources law. She serves as the advisor to the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States and climate change negotiations, particularly on climate adaptation and ocean. And the New African magazine recognized her as one of the 100 most influential Africans in 2021. Angelique has worked in different countries in the Caribbean, Pacific, and the Indian Ocean on a wide range of projects related to sustainable fisheries, sustainable management of marine biodiversity within and beyond national jurisdiction. She serves on the advisory board of the Indian Ocean Decade as an alternative board member of the UNFCCC's Adaptation Fund. Angelique, we're very happy to have you today. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. And I do hope that everybody can see that in the appropriate format. All right, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on was 2022 truly the ocean super year we had hoped for. I think Awni's given us the dose of realism that we framed the conversation. I don't think my presentation goes far off that very pragmatic view. But I thought I would start off with just a timeline of where we are this year. And it really was playing a lot of catch up because so many things was going to take place in 2020. And then, of course, we postponed it to 2021, and then it never happened until we got to 2022. So many things really was in a state of catch up and working with small island nations, a very difficult time when we're very stretched. So we had the BBNJ negotiations, and by the way, the focus of my presentation is very much one on climate and ocean and the COP27 outcomes. So in 2022, we had the BBNJ, INC, IGC, I should say, the intergovernmental negotiations. And then in June 2022, we had this first annual Ocean Climate Dialogue, as well as Antonella has talked about the UN Ocean Conference. We then had IGC 5 for BBNJ. And then in November, we had COP27 as well as the ISA meetings, which has already been talked about a little already. So just for today, I will speak, I don't know the sort of the breadth of audience that we have, so I thought I'd start really from back to basics and go through the history a little bit, and then take us closer to 2022 from COP26, COP27, and then have a think about the way forward. So the history. Many efforts were made to strengthen ocean climate nexus, but let's go back for a moment in time. So when it comes to ocean and climate, and we have to bear in mind that the way in which people have, and probably I'm a lawyer, so I blame everything on lawyers, probably the fault of lawyers. We siloed everything to make things very sectoral in approach, and I think it provides some level of comfort that we can work within these very defined spaces. So this was no different when it came to the UNFCCC as well as the Paris Agreement. This was a space to speak about climate. So therefore, the recognition of ocean, I'd say, was sprinkled here and there, but not given a space of its own. So in Article 4.1 of the UNFCCC, states are obligated to promote, cooperate in the conservation and enhance as appropriate of sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases not controlled by the Montreal Protocol, including the ocean. Right. So here we already see that obligation. It's an article, so it's a operative obligation. Which means it's not preambular, it's not aspirational. States have this obligation. And then we went to the Paris Agreement here as PA, where it starts off more preambular, right? So we're noting the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems, including ocean, and the protection of biodiversity recognized by some cultures as Mother Earth, and noting the importance of climate justice. So we see here again preambular language, which means in legal terms, aspirational, right? And then it goes on to recognizes the importance of conservation and enhancement as appropriate of sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases as referred to in the convention. Here, it's kind of a link back to the convention, but no mention of ocean specifically. So when we go back to the text itself of the Paris Agreement, and this is 2015, right? So what are we, about 7 years ago? Article 4, and again, operative paragraph, in order to achieve the long-term temperature goal set out in Article 2, so that's your 2 striving for 1.5 goal, parties aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gases emissions as soon as possible, recognizing that peaking will take longer for developing country parties, and to undertake rapid reductions thereafter in accordance with best available science, so as to achieve a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases. Again here, although not specific, is that reference to ocean, right? That's sinks. And just for information, whilst I have it to mind, of course, sinks is not just ocean; it also refers to forests. I thought it was very fascinating. Well, I thought it was very funny that at COP27 there was a sinks drinks, which were people who work on sinks, so forest and ocean, would meet up for drinks. But anyway, that's a complete aside. I just thought it just came to my mind as I was using the word sink. But then Article 5.1 of the Paris Agreement says parties should take action to conserve and enhance as appropriate sinks and reservoirs. So again here, very clearly that there needs to be action taken to conserve and enhance. But it is a should provision, right? So it is encouraged as opposed to being obligatory in nature. In Article 5.2, it then doesn't mention ocean, but actually mentions forests, that it focuses on the protection and sustainable management of forests. And when I teach the Ocean Climate Nexus to the AOSIS fellows, we always have this conversation of, is ocean included or excluded here? And we say trick question. And that, of course, is because forests also includes mangroves, and mangroves are a ocean and land biodiversity. So when it comes to I'll actually skip this. I really wanted to just make the point that we do see ocean featuring in both the convention, the UNFCCC, as well as the Paris Agreement, and the convention dates back to 1992. So in an attempt to strengthen this ocean climate nexus, because although you have these obligations or encouragements within the text, we never really saw ocean feature strongly within the UN climate change framework. So there were many days where we would sit around in circles with many countries, Fiji, the Bahamas, amongst many others, thinking about how do we strengthen this nexus. There were ideas including placing ocean within the nationally determined contributions of countries, right? So these are the climate plans that countries have committed to submit every 5 years, or even more often now with the Glasgow Climate Pact set of decisions, saying that it would be better, let's not move anything or let's not institutionalize anything just yet. How about using the existing mechanisms within the process to actually include ocean? So this was one idea that came up. And then ultimately we would see, when all of these were brought together, we could see how well countries are doing in terms of taking ocean climate action. Just a fun fact, I suppose, for everyone. So at this point in time, based on all coastal states, so states with access to the coast, so that's excluding your landlocked landlocked countries, we have 50% of coastal states have actually included something blue, something ocean related within their NDCs in the second round. Then in 2016, there was a move to actually gather friends of the ocean, if you like. So in Marrakesh, we saw different political initiatives. That was in 2016, a year after Paris, where we saw people coming together, known as sort of Friends for the Ocean, pushing for the inclusion of ocean within the NDCs. And this would be both as mitigation measures, so to curb greenhouse gases, as well as adaptation measures, which could be a whole host of things, including fisheries, biodiversity, and amongst other things. So this is where, because different initial declarations, because of our ocean started to come out, countries were really committing that ocean and climate would feature within their national plans. We saw other efforts, again, using existing mechanisms, something called the Nairobi Work Program. And this is a knowledge sharing platform. And there was 1 year which was dedicated to ocean and marine climate action. And then finally, when thinking about loss and damage, which was obviously a big topic at COP27, there were many, and even before that, in terms of the June meeting of this year, there were many links between ocean and loss and damage. There were many stories about the collapse of ecosystems, the moving of tuna species, amongst many other clear stories, clear evidence that loss and damage was also occurring within the ocean space. We then were very lucky to have a Chilean COP presidency, so a country that was very much focused on ocean and had been part of the Friends of the Ocean. And when they had the Chilean COP presidency at COP25, which was in Madrid, after it was supposed to be in Chile, but it had to be moved very shortly after, we had something known as the Blue COP. And this was really to convey that close link between the climate as well as the ocean. And it was in that year that there was also a special report on the ocean and the cryosphere in the face of a changing climate that had been issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And there again, there were very key scientific evidence of how the ocean and climate were linked, both in terms of the ocean being affected by climate change, but also as ocean could be a source of solutions for climate. So within the decision of the Chile Madrid Time for Action, there were efforts that there were the parties, and the president of the COP was commended for highlighting the importance of the ocean. They requested the chair of SUBSTA, which is one of the subsidiary bodies of the UNFCCC Convention, to convene a dialogue on ocean and climate change and how to strengthen mitigation and adaptation action in this context, and to also produce summary reports. So this is going to be the first week request for a ocean and climate change dialogue, right? First request, the chair of SUBSTA is going to put this together. Then, of course, we're all in Madrid, and COVID-19 apparently had already reached there whilst we were there, and the world shuts down. So all of this starts to take place online. So we do have a virtual ocean climate dialogue. As you can see, some of this is captured here in the climate visual. So how do we move to somewhat embedding this, right? So what happens is we all go to Glasgow. It was the first time we'd met in about 1.5 to 2 years. And there was still a commitment by the UK presidency that ocean would also be a feature of their presidency. And here we find that within the decision of COP26, parties commit to now having an annual ocean climate change dialogue, right? So this is the distinction. COP26 has an annual climate change dialogue. So now this is going to happen every year. And of course, it was balanced out. If you're going to have something on ocean, you must have something on land. And you can see paragraph 59 gives that other dialogue, which is the dialogue on land. I think something really interesting is paragraph 60 of this decision then says to all the existing bodies that work within the UNFCCC, you need to think about how to integrate and strengthen ocean-based action within your current mandates. So the parties of the COP, of the Conference of the Parties, are saying to the existing bodies, you need to think about this. You need to think about how to have ocean climate action within your mandates or to strengthen it within your mandates. And this is something that's very telling, and it was very interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit about whether this actually subsequently happens. So now we're at COP27. So I think just to put this into perspective, and going back to my timeline. So in June was when the first of the annual Ocean Climate Dialogue takes place, right? It was actually the second Ocean Climate Dialogue, but it was the first one following the decision to have this annual Ocean Climate Dialogue. And it took place over 3 hours. We did run over time. It did go about almost to 4 hours. Participation was started quite well soon and dwindled very quickly over the course of the dialogue. So it may have started with a somewhat 3/4 packed room. By the end of it, really the participation was sparse. So then from there, the idea was there were many questions about how are we going to capture what's been discussed here? How are we going to continue momentum? And this is where many of the conversations continued in what Antonella spoke about at the UN Ocean Conference. So there were many activities about ocean climate nexus within the UN Ocean Conference. And then we come to COP27. So what happened with regards to ocean there? So let's look at the firsts, right? What happened there? First one, it was the first time that we had an ocean pavilion at COP. And I think it's really important because we've spoken about this distinction between where delegates have the side event space and the negotiation space. I think it's really important to highlight that this ocean pavilion sits in the side event space, right? So government officials and climate negotiators probably go there, like myself. If we've been asked to speak, we don't necessarily just stay there for very long. Interventions made and then shuttle back to negotiations. But it was the first time we had an ocean pavilion. So which means that there was a full stream of ocean activities at the pavilion. The second thing, that there were also outside activities such as the Ocean Climate Summit that took place and many ocean activities outside of the conference center. Again, here speaking to the question of access, if you didn't have access to come in, you could still participate outside the official setting. In terms of progress, this relates to the negotiation space now. I think it's very important to appreciate that ocean does not have an agenda item within this conference. There is no agenda item. There is no dedicated space and time to talk about ocean within the negotiations. This was decided by different parties, different countries, that since I've been involved since 2018, there was no appetite to have a separate agenda item. It was always felt that this would pull negotiators out of existing streams, that it would, there was already so much to cover that they didn't want more added to it. So there isn't dedicated time and space to talk about ocean within the conference of the parties. But there was still some level of progress. And this is through what we call the cover decision. Now, the cover decision is an overarching decision. It is genuinely, generally populated by the views of parties, but is really at the discretion of the presidency. They have the final say, really, of what goes in and what goes out. Just to speak a little bit about the evolution of the text when it came to ocean, I think it's really important that this issue is one of the few issues within the UNFCCC process that isn't divided based on developed and developing country dichotomy. Right? So it's not that developed countries support this and developing countries don't support it, or vice versa. There is a group of countries that come together from developed and developing countries that call themselves Friends of the Ocean and work on getting ocean text within the negotiations. And that's one thing, and it's geographically very diverse countries. The second thing is we had to work together to actually get what type of text, what should be the focus of our text. And one of the main concerns that came out of the first of the annual ocean climate change was that the topics were decided by the UNFCCC Secretariat. So parties, although they made submissions, the final say was with the Secretariat. And there was a view that there needs to come back to a more parties-driven process, a more structured process. And this is where parties pushed to have a little bit more structure by introducing co-facilitators within this process that would work with the Secretariat and the chair of the subsidiary body to come up with a more structured approach to the dialogues. Interestingly enough, there were additional paragraphs, whether it was benign or nefarious intentions. There was one country that did introduce additional paragraphs that spoke to financing of ocean climate action. Interestingly enough, when so one developed country in particular decided to delete that text, even though they were part of the group of the Friends of the Ocean, because it included commitments to financing or encouragements for financing, which they didn't think was necessary in the cover decision. So what we have at the end of the day is 2 paragraphs in the cover decision that just adds more structure to the ocean climate dialogue. And it's in the very nature of this process, incremental progress is the only way to describe this. In addition, there is also designing. So the second paragraph talks about encouraging ocean climate action. So it sends out this broad call to encourage ocean action. And of course, as you may recall, I highlighted that constituted bodies and other processes were asked to see how they could strengthen their ocean climate work within their existing space. Only the CTCN, which is the technology mechanism, has taken up that call and included ocean in their work plan. I think I'll move on to just some questions for reflection. One of my main concerns about the ocean climate nexus is that submissions this year in 2022, the alleged super year for the ocean, actually had very few submissions from parties, from countries. Most of the submissions were actually from NGOs. And there is a real concern that this dialogue becomes an NGO space. And once you lose party buy-in, it then really, you see the disconnect. You no longer see the connection between what's happening in this event as well as what's happening in the negotiations. So there is a true concern of, will this survive as a meaningful endeavor of strengthening ocean and climate nexus? So I guess by making it more party-driven with the introduction of co-facilitators, perhaps this changes the trajectory slightly, maybe. But the question really is, can we rely on the discretion of the COP presidency? There have been presidencies that don't even think there should be a cover decision. Can we rely on the COP presidency's discretion to always create a space for ocean within the text, or is it really time for something more? If the agenda item have we overcome our fear of the agenda item? Or is there another pathway that we can take? For example, going down the creation of an action plan, as was the case for gender, or the way in which we treated agriculture. So really a question for everyone, for us all to reflect on. At COP27, yes, there was incremental procedural progress, but in the long term, as we prepare, and we've always known that the dialogue was only the start to something bigger. When is the bigger thing supposed to happen? When is it on the horizon? Or, should we have a few more years of dialogues before something comes to fruition? Given the state of affairs, I press for something more urgent, more quickly, but of course, there must be appetite by 193 countries to make that happen. I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting presentation, and I learned a lot of new stuff and interesting aspects. Thank you so much. And I think we are at a perfect place now to reflect on all of the feedback that we received, and the comments and the reflections from the United Nations Ocean Conference and BBNJ and COP27. But before we proceed to your questions and comments, I would like to have our polls, just to understand your opinion on whether on what was wrong or how this year actually did in terms of ocean protection. So Connor, if you could please launch the first question. Yeah, so what do you think? Was 2022 the super year for the ocean that you hoped for? And I'll just give a little time for everyone to answer that. And the panelists can also vote. Okay, so maybe we can see the results. Right, okay, so for 48% are saying that no, the 2022 was not the super year for the ocean, and 23% are still hesitant to answer. Thank you so much, Connor. Can you please launch the second question? So this question is a follow-up for those who have answered no to the previous question. So why do you think so? These are obviously not all the possible answers, but this is you can choose several answers. I will also give you some time to choose the answers.
We've just got a little under 50% responded so far, so still just a few more to go, Evgeniia.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would like to say that we at the ECOP program, we fully agree with the comments that have been voiced today by our speakers about all the hurdles and challenges that ECOPs are having in terms of getting access to those to those events. So we heard many stories where visas were not given, or there is no financial support to go to such conferences, especially from developing countries. And this is really a problem, and we will do our best to try to voice that concern, and hopefully change this situation. Yeah, Conrad, can we probably already see the results if people have voted? Right, okay, so 68% are saying that outcomes from those events and negotiations fell short of expectations. And the second best answer is that more needs to be done to include meaningful civil society representatives. Cool, okay. Thank you so much. And if we can have the third questions, this is for us just to understand where you learned about this webinar and which channels work best. And again, you can choose multiple answers, but probably if you can try to choose like the best or the first channel that you learned this information from. Yeah, I'll just give a few more seconds to answer. Yes, there is still COP15 coming, which will happen in a few weeks, and hopefully, yeah, Marie Morgan, hopefully we can see some progress there. But again, there is a question of, getting accreditation and getting funding, etc. And especially accreditation seems to be really a huge problem.
We've got a decent level of response there, Evgeniia, so I can end the poll and share it if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. Right, okay. So that is, so from the International Ocean Institute, participants, most of them got information from the email to alumni, and then the second channel is Facebook. And then of the ECO program participants, it's again from the newsletter, and then followed by our post on the Global Stakeholder Forum. Right. Well, okay, thank you so much for that. That is really valuable information. And I guess we can now open the floor to your questions and comments. So I guess you can either post your question in the chat or raise a hand, and Cornel will just provide you with the opportunity to speak and direct your question to either of the speakers, or if it's just a general question.
I can't see any raised hands just yet. So as Evgeniia was saying, if you'd like to ask a question, just feel free to raise your hand and I'll be able to promote you to a panelist so you'll be able to ask your question live. Alternatively, as was said, if you fill in the Q&A feature as well.
I think there are a few questions in the chat that probably we can try to address to our speakers, if you want to pick up a few of them.
Yes, of course. So I'll probably go for the most recent one then that I can see, which was around expectations for the year 2022. What were the expectations? I imagine they're probably saying originally so happy for anyone on the panel to take that one if anyone would like to raise their hand.
if I may get the ball rolling. Certainly, taking a step backwards, what we have seen during the last few years is that whatever progress had been made before the pandemic, not only did maybe that progress not proceed, but I think many of us will agree that even what progress was being made or was expected in all the SDGs, not just the ocean one, but definitely in the ocean one as well, a lot of progress made was actually reversed in the years prior to this year. So we are also starting to a certain extent on a back footing. So the beginning of 2022 did not just have to recoup or make progress, but it also had to recoup those losses due to the pandemic. We're all familiar with them. Loss of funds, loss of momentum, loss of or diversion of attention to other maybe more pressing matters at the time, fine. So if I had to say personally what the expectations for the year 2022 year were, for me it would be first of all that we recouped the losses of the previous 2 years. Secondly, that we continued to move forward on achieving and implementing all those actions previously agreed on to achieve SDG 14. Thirdly, that we, from the lessons learned up until then, I personally would have expected a lot more progress, a lot more wisdom, if you may, but maybe I'm an optimist. And certainly, just to reference a slide I gave, during UNOC, in Lisbon, there was definitely an expectation then that the deep seabed mining question would, the outcome would be different to what in fact we got. And of course, the same with the discussions on legislation in areas beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ discussions, which then did not yield firm outcomes in August. So from my point of view, I went into 2022 in January with a lot more optimism than I find myself having right now at the moment. I mean, the curtains are not down yet, but truly, I wish we had made a lot more progress, knowing what we know and knowing what the expectation. I don't think we can hide behind the excuse, we're not sure, we don't know anymore. So I don't think that excuse stands. So all in all, disappointed, yes. Maybe someone can add something to this.
Yeah, if I can come in here, I completely agree, Antonella, and I think I just want to add another perspective as well. I think there is really an issue of trust within the system that is really hindering progress. I was actually quite shocked by the narrative that was taking place at the Ocean Pavilion. Narratives was changing. You no longer heard narratives around the importance of marine protected areas or the benefits that would emanate from having those. And this is despite everyone's despite differing views on the effectiveness of MPAs, but the idea was always an encouragement that we had to do more for the ocean. We had to meet SDGs. We had to meet Aichi, the Aichi targets. The narrative I was hearing in the Ocean Pavilion that really took me aback was, how can you expect countries to protect when they have other more pressing needs? And that narrative is one that is actually running throughout the process. All processes.
Very dangerous, yes.
Why should I stop? Right now, I cannot continue phasing down certain fossil fuels because I have other matters I need to deal with regionally that is prohibiting me from doing that. And I need to think about my people's very cold winters coming up, amongst other things. So the narrative is actually running through and through the system. And I think what worsened it was COVID and the vaccination inequality or inequity, because there really was an issue where it exacerbated the have and have not divide. And because certain things could have been done but was not done, so patent related, create exceptions so that things could be produced, where vaccines could be produced cheaply and be sent around. There's been a continued disintegration of trust between countries of the world. And as a result, despite the science is clear, despite everything, there's just always a reason to give an excuse. Because if you're not doing it, why should I do it? And whatever it is. And all of a sudden, the way in which governments are interacting with each other, because of that lack of trust, is affecting obviously everybody else, civil society, people, vulnerable communities, because then there's just inaction. And I think this is just another layer, another perspective that I'd like to add to what Antonella talked about, because not only are we starting on a back foot in terms of the commitments, and mind you, many of the commitments that Antonella spoke about at UNOC, we're still waiting for the first batch from UNOC 1 to actually be fulfilled. It hasn't happened. And without those clear signals that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it, we're actually starting on a back foot because we didn't see each other for 2 years at the UN. The camaraderie and the trust that we built over time slowly slipping away, but also action and rhetoric is not aligning. So this is just another perspective that I'd want to share, that may have caused 2022 to not be as successful as I think many of us did want it to be. We weren't even able to close BBNJ, and the narrative we got towards the end of it was we never intended to close it. We have some things in CBD to close before we can close it here. So the honesty and the openness is not as present as we hoped it would have been at the start of 2022. Thanks.
And I think a good mirror of that is where the money flows. And that's I think a very telling indicator, right? Yeah.
Thank you both for exceptional answer. We actually do now have a hand up as well from Blessing Charuka. So Blessing, I will bring you off of mute and you'll be able to ask your question live now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for the great deliberations which are going on. I really appreciate that, because it's really giving a lot of, shedding a lot of light to what's going on. As ECOPs, we are always eager to see where this is going. Are we going to achieve it? Especially, I'm in Africa, so I have to speak from where I am at. So, if you understand, from January, we had the pre-Ocean Decade meeting in Kenya, going on to the African Kickoff Conference in Egypt. And then, there were a lot of deliberations, commitments. And then now we are closing the year. We're still looking at that. Are we going to achieve? Because like I said previously, that I think that if we do not benefit from the Ocean Decade, because this has been the only effort that has been done to bring youth, to really participate and be part of the development. So the skill gap, I still feel that it still exists in terms of practice. Like I've asked the IOI if they are going to have some practical trainings, because we have had, theoretical studies from university, a lot of theoretical studies. Now we are where we are supposed to be professional now. We would really appreciate if we have maybe specialists coming in and then training on something that is really, you know, a practical skill. Maybe where we have capacity, like South Africa, we have Egypt, we have some countries where we have the equipment, because most countries don't have the institutional infrastructure to really provide those kind of commitments. Then in terms of data, we don't have the equipment as well. Like, we are supposed to be monitoring our costs, but then we don't have the equipment. So that is a huge challenge for ECOPs. How do we get, like, at the end of the decade, we are supposed to have like a cohort of specialized marine professionals in terms of skill, but then are we going to achieve that, or will we still be in the same position? I mean, I would talk too much, but I would just like to bring this to light. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring this to light, and I hope everyone will contribute so that at the end of the day, we can all achieve something. Indeed, our governments are committed to something, some other things which are really more important for them. So I hope we could do something if we are supported, but then how? We don't have a clue yet. Thank you.
If I can just offer some reflections, Blessing, I sit on the advisory board of the UN Ocean Decade. It's part of ECOP actually, and one of the things that we struggle with is that it's a great map that the decade always pulls out. You know, like, where is the science actually coming from? And the science is mostly coming from essentially global north, right? Your UK, US, Australian universities. And then you see very little science coming from Africa, least developed countries, and small island developing states. And they undertook a study to find out, you know, what are the issues? Like, what is blocking this from happening? Is it a lack of opportunities, or, you know, what's causing it? And I think the issue is it's structural. Right? It's not something that can be quickly fixed. So it's not like I can give the Seychelles a consultant to write a project and submit it to the decade and then feel like, oh, my work is done. There's a project from Seychelles. The reality is there's structural capacity constraints. So even though many countries do not have the research institutes, they don't have a huge number of people to then roll out the projects, and even if they did, then the capacity of those people to be able to administer these initiatives and implement them, and then just having the technology. So like, you could have the people and they're, you know, great marine scientists, and then you don't have the technology or the research vessels to actually get the work done, and then you're waiting for some good soul to think about offering you their research vessel. So you're, you know, entirely dependent on charity essentially. So I think the issue is structural. And it's really, how do you get the tech and the capacity to Africa, least developed countries, and small island developing states. And I'm hopeful because the decade is talking about it realistically. You know, there isn't that skirting around the issue oftentimes that we find. You know, like, let's offer a few scholarships and then feel content with ourselves. There's really sort of facing the music type of discussions, thinking about infrastructure, like, you know, even if we have data, if we do get data, how is it going to be held? What kind of database would be required? And really thinking about it structurally. And that gives me hope. But at the same time, it does require resources. And if we go back to the question of resources, then we go back to our previous question about fulfilling commitments and making things happen. And I'm not going to go there because I'd like to stick to your specific question. So, and I agree with you, like, if it doesn't deliver for those countries, then really what's the point if we're going to just be pushing status quo, right? So I completely agree with you, but I'm hopeful in that we're having those frank discussions. But at the same time, I think yeah, I think unless we see the commitment with regards to resources, we may fall short. But I have colleagues also working on the resource mobilization piece, and the news is promising. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the input. I mean, that brings much hope. We hope to achieve the objectives of the Ocean Decade, and we are fully geared. I mean, we are all supporting the Ocean Decade. We believe we're going to achieve it together. So thank you.
If I may just add something small. I had answered your question a little bit obliquely in the chat, in the sense that as well as structural and technical support, I think there also needs to be, but in every country, a kind of facilitating environment, in the sense that there is also things happen faster when it is clearly understood that they are critical, that they are important. And I think that without having conducted surveys or anything, and echoing Angelique, could more be done maybe to create a more enabling environment in order to bring up the recognition that these are critical needs, not just research luxuries, if you wish. The IOI has, well, we're 50 years old this year, and we've been doing capacity development and training and things like that for years now, and we still offer it every year. Our focus is more, rather than on scientific techniques in the detail, is more on the question of governance and policy, and creating this enabling environment which would ideally bring decision makers and policy makers to recognize how critical it is to support things like research, things like science-based decision making. So just to build on what Angelique mentioned, I think these two requirements come in tandem. Firstly, the capacity to actually carry out this research, these things that are, but also the recognition of why it's critical to do these things, and how you can carry this data that you gather into, transform it into information, which in turn influences and guides, the best decision making possible, even in terms of long-termism. So I just wanted to add this aspect as well, to maybe it's another ingredient that we need to think about when we think about enabling the uptake of ocean science and things like that. So that's it.
All noted. Thank you.
Thank you all once again for the great answer to the question. We've got one more question in the Q&A that I think would be good to touch upon from Sabine Zimmerman, which is what can we all do to further push the messages that the ocean is inextricably linked to climate change, to avoid that the acknowledgement of this is viewed as progress when it is barely accepted minimum, really. So happy for anyone on the panel to take that question there. And maybe possibly, if you can, there is another question here from Sabine, which was where can we secure more funding for the oceans, especially the areas beyond those of national jurisdictions? Any hopes, ideas, etc.? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the for the first one you asked about, how do we, let me just look at the question here. How do we push the messages that the ocean is inextricably linked to climate? Okay, well, I mean, absolutely keep pushing. But I think I would put the challenge to IOI, in fact, because I only know about ocean and climate and the nexus, because I'm from an island, so it's it's just very obvious. I can see the top of the mountain and the bottom and the horizon all in one space. 2, we have very small delegations, so I have to know and be able to work across different spaces, right? So I cover ocean and I cover climate, which means that I automatically need to be able to understand both, and being able to understand both means I see the connection with both. Now, that is the capacity constraint of being from a small island. The reality is most people, or many people, I should say, not most, many people have the luxury of focusing on one thing. And that's what's happening. It's the fact that at the UNFCCC or at these COPs, COP27 or COP28 or whatever, you have climate people there, people who specialize on climate change. And they're very focused on that area without knowing, and they have whole other line ministry who probably doesn't even get the invitation to turn up to COP, right? They go to BBNJ. They have another meeting to attend this year, and they focus on ocean. And in fact, I'd go as far as to say, I don't know how often those two speak to each other. And they're from the same government, right? But we work, as I said, we created these structures based on silos and sectors. So even internationally, it translated nationally, right? So you have your ministry responsible for climate change, which is often very different to your ministry responsible for whatever, maritime affairs, ocean affairs, blue economy, whichever people prefer. So I would actually challenge IOI to come up with a policymakers course helps. Oh, perfect. Challenge accepted and delivered. That allows for climate people to understand more about ocean and ocean people to understand more about climate. I think that's the most useful way to approach it. But I certainly wouldn't stop civil society from having those conversations with negotiators who are there. Because as civil society who are working on these issues, you're able to see the nexus, but don't ever assume that people have the same knowledge as you. So having those conversations with them is certainly one way, but IOI is on the ball and is, I'm sure, going to tell us more about how they're delivering on bridging that nexus. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. You've thrown me the ball, I've caught it. Yes, so ironically, Malta is also a very small island, so I know exactly what you mean about one person wearing several hats. On the one hand, it's very stressful for that person because you've got to be in about 7 places at once. But the fact that you're from a small island, you probably agree, Angelique, is that it's much easier to know who you need to speak to and who's doing what, hopefully, than in a bigger country. Anyway, this is what I imagine, because this is our experience here from a small country. So it might be that, maybe there are more people attending to the same thing in team fashion, simply because there are less of us on an island. But as an aside, one thing that crossed my mind when you were speaking in answer to the previous question before this, about your experience in COP, was, to my mind, were these the same people who would have been in Lisbon, for instance? So I wonder if different conferences, different thematics, attract different people with different priorities. So that crossed my mind as you were speaking. It might or might not be one of the answers we need to learn. When it comes to, again, what you were mentioning earlier, and also my comment before about creating an enabling environment, the IOI, what the IOI does in terms of capacity building and training is we work on ocean governance most specifically, rather than the more practical points that Blessing raised. So our courses are not the ones where we go out with buoys and thermometers and pressure gauges and stuff, but the courses we organize, and there are some even in Africa, Blessing, so please take a look at our website, and there will be more next year. From time to time we organize them. But our courses are really designed to bring people from different disciplines talking together. We're running a course at the moment in Malta, in fact, focusing on the regional seas in and around Europe. But there's one in Africa, there's one in Thailand, there's one in Canada. Anyway, plenty of different foci. And what our intention is with these courses, because we know that I think this is the way it has to be in the future, is to get people who, in their own way, you know, they're pretty expert in what they do. If it's you know, oceanographer, she knows what she has to do. If the guy's a lawyer, he knows law of the sea. If so-and-so is a coast guard, they know their competence really well. But sometimes you find that during these courses, this is the first time they're actually speaking to each other on a peer-to-peer basis. And I always say that our courses, the knowledge transfer is really not from the lecturer to the class, top down, but a lot of knowledge and exchange and networking and you know, tips and insider knowledge comes from the peer-to-peer exchange between a maritime lawyer who, for instance, has sat down for the first time next to someone from the maritime squadron or the Coast Guard, as we know it here. And really, this one person is writing the laws at his office, and the other person is actually there at the thin end of the wedge enforcing them. And I think that this is a metaphor for ocean governance and ocean decision-making generally. You cannot govern the ocean simply by ignoring that people need to fish for their food and their livelihood. You cannot imagine that you can govern the ocean just by collecting data from it without taking into account the socio-economic aspects. You cannot imagine for a moment that we can reach climate targets without taking into account the fact that the ocean is a massive carbon sink and that there are impacts on the ocean from this expectation of ours. So in addition to all the very good work all the ocean disciplines bring, I think there is a huge, huge need, firstly, to recognize that silos really are not going to get us anywhere. We need to work a lot more together and dialogue with open minds together, because what might be an acceptable solution for me, a different discipline, a scientist from a different discipline might realize this is going to have a massive impact, say, on corals. So people need to be talking to each other. And another thing that we've been doing recently at the IOI, which ties in neatly to Sabine's second question, is the issue of ocean literacy. I always bring my poor dentist into this, and Cosmin knows what I'm going to say. My dentist is a professional, a scientist, very competent, but the only thing he knows about the ocean and ocean issues is that it's about plastic, isn't it? And the truth is, it's much, much bigger than that. So I think the twin streams of wider access to ocean knowledge under ocean literacy, which should foster really an understanding of the cross-cutting impact. And the same thing, ocean literacy and ocean knowledge at decision-making levels, I think this is where we need to emphasize. And of course, I think funds, resources are critical, whether it's human resources, whether it's diverting expertise to the question, whether it's money, pounds and pence, dollars. I think these are all critical. So I don't know if I've opened the debate further, but I think attention needs to be paid to all these if we need to achieve our Agenda 2030 a little bit faster than we are now. I hope I've answered your question and given some perspective and maybe added a little to what Angelique has said.
Thank you very much. Great answers once again. I can confirm that is the last of the questions that we have. So I'm now going to hand over to Cosmin. Cosmin, take it away, please.
I'm not sure what is left to say after so many great contributions. Unfortunately, Dr. Behnam had to go for a personal appointment, but I take the chance to thank first of all the speakers, Antonella and Angelique, and also the great work done by the ECOPs program. And perhaps a few more words by the ECOPs program, Natalie or Evgeniia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kos. And I would like again to thank all the speakers for this amazing webinar. It was really very interesting, and I feel that we could have stayed even longer and to discuss more, but we are already like 20 minutes over our time when we had to finish. But we definitely still in touch, and you got the contact details for our program and for International Ocean Institute. So if you have any questions to either of our organizations, please feel free to reach out. And I'm sure that this is just the start of our amazing cooperation series with International Ocean Institute, and we will be bringing more of such webinars to your attention in 2023. So stay tuned, stay connected, stay subscribed, and thank you so much. Have a good day, evening, and a great weekend.
Thank you.